At the elementary school graduation party for my daughter at this prestigious private academy, they quietly directed me toward the kitchen. Staff entrance is this way. I am Judge Magnolia Mallory, one of the youngest federal appeals court judges in the circuit. I could have corrected them immediately, but when I caught the whispered words from the group of 3 parents near the entrance, "Keep that cleaner away from us a bit. We don't want her too close," spoken by the woman in the middle just loud enough for me to hear, I froze for a split second. The man beside her gave a small dismissive wave of his hand, agreeing without a word. The teenage girl with them let out a soft scoff and turned away, already bored. All 3 were dressed in obvious money-tailored suits, shimmering fabrics, watches that caught the light. They moved on as if nothing had happened, laughing about something else. My fingers tightened around the crisp white apron that had been placed in my hand. I tied the strings behind my back without saying anything, not because I felt humiliated, but because I knew something they didn't. Some lessons only hit home when power chooses silence first, letting people dig their own holes. That night, I decided to listen more than I spoke. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I read every single one, and I truly love finding out who's here with me in this community. I held the tray of fruit punch and stepped through the side door onto the school grounds, twinkling with lights. Warm, golden strings draped across the lawn, casting soft glows on the neatly arranged white tables. The scent of fresh flowers mixed with expensive perfumes hung in the evening air. Parents in designer outfits mingled in loose circles, their voices blending with the low music from hidden speakers. My gaze swept the crowd until it found Orion near the stage area. She wore the plain white dress we had picked out together, nothing extravagant, just clean and comfortable. She was laughing freely with her classmates, the kind of open joy that made her whole face light up. Then she spotted me. Her laughter cut off abruptly, eyes widening in confusion and worry. She took a long step toward me, body leaning forward as if ready to run over and fix whatever was wrong. I gave a subtle shake of my head and touched a finger to my lips. Orion froze, her brows furrowed, lips pressing together tightly. She blinked rapidly, glancing back at her friends, then at me again. The internal struggle was clear on her face, the pull between rushing to her mom and trusting that I had a reason. Seconds stretched long before she drew a deep breath, shoulders rising and falling, and slowly turned back to the group. Her posture stayed a little stiff, though, like she was holding herself in check. The cold metal of the tray bit into my wrists, sending a familiar ache up my arms. It brought back flashes of long nights years ago, balancing heavy loads in dim banquet halls, forcing smiles for tips that paid for diapers and textbooks, while Orion slept in a second-hand crib nearby. I started circulating among the tables, pouring drinks, clearing empty cups, blending into the background the way experienced staff learned to do. Guests accepted refills without looking up, already deep in their conversations about vacations and college plans. The group of 3 from the entrance stood near the main donor table, drawing people like magnets. I caught fragments of names as I passed Frank Carroll, Alice Carroll, and their daughter Yara. Frank had that polished look of someone who never worried about bills. Alice's jewelry caught the light every time she gestured. Yara, 16 or so, held her phone loosely, surveying the lawn with detached interest. They formed the center of a small orbit. Other parents approached with easy familiarity, offering compliments on recent donations or asking about upcoming events. I adjusted my path to stay within earshot without drawing attention. Frank was talking about city development, voice carrying just enough. The old school property deal is moving faster than expected. The council's been very cooperative. A man in a blazer nodded. Smart investment, prime location. Alice smiled smoothly. It's all about timing. And knowing the right people. Yara glanced at her phone, then around the lawn, her expression unchanging. I kept serving, moving from table to table, the tray growing lighter as glasses filled. The conversations around the carols shifted to school matters, new facilities, scholarship funds, who sat on which committees. One woman asked Alice about future plans for the children. Alice's tone warmed slightly. Yara has some exciting opportunities lined up at the top prep schools. It's good to have a track record with the institution. Frank added quietly, "Connections make all the difference these days." Their words weren't loud declarations, but the way they were received, nods, knowing smiles, told the story. Legacy and generosity opened paths that raw merit sometimes couldn't. I passed the dessert area where kids crowded around cupcakes frosted with the school logo. Parents watched indulgently, some taking photos. Orion was helping a younger classmate reach a plate. Her earlier tension eased, but not gone. The evening flowed smoothly, laughter rising in waves. I stayed in the rhythm, invisible, yet seeing everything. The carols remained the focal point, their circle growing as more guests drifted over to pay respects or share updates. I circled back occasionally, catching new pieces, mentions of environmental reports being handled, committee decisions leaning certain ways. Nothing overt, just hints dropped with confidence. The ache in my wrists faded into background noise, replaced by sharper focus. The lawn felt divided in subtle ways, those who belonged without question, and those who navigated carefully around them. I continued my rounds, tray balanced, expression calm. I refilled glasses at the next table, ears tuned toward the carols. They never said anything outright. It was all in the exchanged glances and subtle smiles when someone brought up some of the newer families who joined this year. Alice tilted her head just enough toward the stage area where Orion was playing tag with her friends. Frank adjusted his tie, his gaze brushing past my daughter before sliding away as if she were part of the scenery. Yara held her phone loosely, giving Orion a long look that ended with a slight curl of her lip before she shifted her attention elsewhere. The atmosphere around their circle felt different, tighter, more exclusive. Long-time donors knew exactly how close to stand, how loud to laugh. Newer parents hovered at the edges, waiting for an opening that rarely came. I cleared a nearby table of used plates, stacking them carefully. The invisible boundary was clear to anyone paying attention. That's when Ophelia approached the table adjacent to theirs. She was an older student earning community service hours by helping with service tray, balanced precariously in her hands. A slight tremble caused a few drops of punch to splash onto the cloth near Yara's place setting. Alice's voice was calm, almost polite. "Someone should handle this." Frank didn't glance over, simply smoothing the sleeve of his jacket. Yara turned halfway, tone light but pointed. "Careful." Ophelia's face went pale. She whispered apologies, setting the tray down too quickly and fumbling for napkins. I was there in seconds. I placed my own tray aside, pulled a clean cloth from my pocket, and wiped the small spots from the table and floor in smooth motions. The spill was minor, barely noticeable, but the weight of it hung in the air. Ophelia met my eyes, worry clear that she might have caused issues for another worker. I gave her a small nod, nothing more. She took a steadying breath and moved on, posture straightening as she went. The carols had already resumed their conversation the moment dismissed. I reset the table, fresh napkins, aligned glasses, then continued my path through the crowd. The dessert station drew a steady stream of children, their parents trailing behind with phones ready for photos. Orion was in the middle of it, handing out cupcakes to younger kids, her earlier stiffness gone as she focused on the task. I passed close enough to catch her quick glance my way, checking, reassuring herself I was still there. I kept my expression neutral, giving nothing away. Conversations floated around me as I worked. A group near the carols discussed the school's expansion plans, voices low but animated. One man asked Frank about potential delays. Frank's reply was easy. "Everything's on track. The important parts are taken care of." Alice added, "It's all about having the right guidance." Their circle nodded in agreement, the kind of nod that comes from shared understanding. I served another table, listening to fragments about committee votes and funding priorities. Nothing explicit, just enough to paint the picture. The string quartet shifted to a livelier piece, drawing more families toward the open area for informal dancing. Children ran between adults' laughter mixing with the music. I stayed on the move tray in hand, part of the flow without disrupting it. Ophelia appeared again at the edge of the service tent, restocking her supplies. She looked steadier now, focusing on the task. The coordinator gave her an approving pat on the shoulder, small gesture but meaningful. I noted it along with everything else. The evening continued its polished rhythm, guests enjoying the catered spread, the carefully curated atmosphere. The carols remained the unspoken center, their influence felt in who approached them and who didn't. I kept circulating, gathering the subtle pieces that were starting to form a larger pattern. I continued my rounds through the tables, pausing near the group where Frank was talking with several other parents about real estate. He spoke with that easy confidence of someone who rarely met resistance. The project on the old school site is moving along nicely. The city council has been very supportive. Alice nodded in agreement. The key is keeping momentum. Delays hurt everyone involved. One of the men in the circle holding a glass of wine asked casually, "What about the environmental assessment? Any issues there?" Frank's smile didn't waver. A few minor details left. "Our legal team is handling it to make sure everything's perfect." They left it at that, moving on to timelines and potential returns. No one pressed for more. But I had heard variations of that phrasing too many times in my courtroom, vague assurances that often masked deliberate omissions. It wasn't ignorance, it was strategy. Bury concerns in layers of paperwork, make them seem insignificant until approvals were secured. I kept my face impassive as I refilled water glasses at a nearby setup, but my mind was already piecing together what wasn't being said. The conversation drifted to partnerships and zoning variances. Names of council members dropped like casual references. Alice mentioned an upcoming meeting with planners, her tone suggesting it was already in the bag. Frank added, "We've invested a lot in community relations. It pays off." Their group laughed softly, the kind of laugh that comes from shared certainty. I moved on, clearing plates from a family who had just finished dessert. The children had left frosting smudges on the cloth, innocent marks that someone else would clean. Orion was now near the photo booth, posing with friends in silly props. She looked happy, unaware of the undercurrents flowing around her. I circled back toward the main area, staying on the periphery of the carol's orbit. A woman in a red dress asked Frank about risks. He shrugged lightly. "Every development has them. Good preparation minimizes surprises." Alice chimed in. "And good advisors." Yara, who had been quiet, glanced up from her phone. "As long as the right decisions are made early." The words were innocuous on their own, but, in context, they carried weight. I served another table, listening to overlapping voices talk of property values rising, new amenities for the neighborhood. One parent mentioned contamination concerns from old sites. Frank dismissed it smoothly. "Those reports are thorough. Anything found gets addressed properly. No elaboration." I recognized the pattern: deflect, reassure, move on. It worked because few people pushed for details at social events. The string quartet played a gentle melody, parents swaying with children in their arms. I kept working the routine, allowing me to blend in while absorbing more. Snippets about bidding processes, environmental consultants on retainer, city approvals streamlined. Nothing incriminating on the surface. Just business talk. But combined with the confidence, the connections mentioned, it painted a picture I had seen before. Influence used to smooth edges that should have been sharp. I passed the beverage station, restocking ice as needed. Ophelia was there, briefly loading fresh pitchers. She gave me a small, grateful smile before heading out again. The coordinator gave her an approving pat on the shoulder, small gesture but meaningful. I noted it along with everything else. The carols group grew slightly as more donors joined the discussion, turning to future school expansions tied to community development. Frank's voice carried. "It's all connected. Strong partnerships benefit everyone." Alice agreed. especially the next generation. Yara nodded attention back on her screen. I continued my path, the pieces fitting together more clearly with each pass. The project wasn't just ambition, it was leverage, and leverage, when misused, left traces. I maintained my steady pace expression, unchanged mind racing ahead. The evening air cooled slightly, guests pulling wraps closer. Conversations flowed, glasses clinked, children chased fireflies released for the occasion. I stayed in the background, collecting what others overlooked. The pattern was emerging, subtle, calculated, familiar from years on the bench. Not reckless, careful enough to seem clean, but not careful enough. I adjusted my tray and moved on. The discussions grew more animated as alcohol loosened tongues, but the core message remained the same: progress at any reasonable cost. A council contact was mentioned again, this time with a wink about mutual benefits. Alice laughed softly. Everyone wins when things move forward. Frank raised his glass in a small toast to that. I cleared another table, stacking dishes neatly. The implications were clear to me: environmental shortcuts justified as necessary for growth. I had presided over cases where similar attitudes led to long-term consequences, costs shifted to taxpayers or residents years later. Here, it was dressed in community improvement. Yara contributed occasionally, her comments sharp and brief, echoing her parents' worldview. The group dispersed slightly as some headed for photos, but the carols remained the anchor. I kept my distance appropriate for service, close enough to catch the rhythm of their talk. Phrases about streamlined reviews and practical solutions repeated in variations. No admissions, just enough to confirm my suspicions. The night deepened, lights twinkling brighter against the darkening sky. Families gathered for group pictures, children growing sleepy. I continued serving the role, allowing unrestricted movement. Every fragment added to the mosaic. The project relied on downplaying risks, using influence to navigate regulations. Common enough in development, but crossing lines when safety was compromised. I poured the last of a pitcher, mind turning over possibilities. The pieces were aligning. I set the empty container aside and reached for a fresh one. The mood of the party began shifting toward the speech portion as guests drifted closer to the stage. Conversations quieted. Chairs scraped as people found seats on the lawn. The string quartet wrapped up their set with a soft flourish, leaving a brief hush before the program started. I positioned myself near the edge of the gathering crowd, tray balanced, ready to serve anyone who needed a refill during the transition. Alice's voice rose above the low murmur, warm and maternal, as she spoke to a cluster of mothers. Yara has been placed on the priority list for the top prep academy in the region. It really fits the school's culture. Frank nodded beside her. We've supported the institution for years. The board appreciates that kind of commitment. They didn't mention any other candidates by name, but Yara's gaze swept across the lawn and paused for a moment at the far corner, where Ophelia sat on a folding chair during her short break. Ophelia had her thick test prep book open on her lap, pencil tucked behind her ear, pages filled with handwritten notes in the margins. She was absorbed, brow furrowed in concentration. Yara's eyes lingered just long enough, then moved on with a faint, satisfied expression. The connection hit me instantly. Ophelia, the student whose quiet determination I had glimpsed earlier, was the one being edged out. Not through anything overt. No stolen application or forged scores, just the subtle pressure of long-term donations tipping the scale toward cultural fit and community alignment. The kind of influence that never leaves a paper trail but still decides outcomes. I set my tray down on a side table, the clink of glass barely audible over the growing anticipation for the speeches. A chill traced my spine, not from the evening breeze, but from recognition. I had seen this before in admission disputes that reached appellate-level merit, overlooked because legacy and generosity carried more weight in private institutions. Here it was happening in real time, dressed in polite conversation. Guests settled into their seats, programs rustling. Children fidgeted, parents shushed them gently. Orion found a spot on the grass with her friend's legs crossed, looking up at the stage expectantly. I stayed standing at the periphery part of the service team, yet apart from it. Alice continued sharing details about upcoming interviews and campus visits, her tone proud but measured. Frank added comments about networking events and alumni connections. Yara listened occasionally, contributing with short observations about facilities or programs. Their circle absorbed the compliments from others, the conversation flowing naturally into how such opportunities shaped futures. No one challenged the assumption that priority was earned through support rather than pure achievement. I watched Ophelia close her book and stand smoothing her uniform before heading back to work. Her movements were precise, focused, someone who knew every minute counted. The disparity sharpened in my mind. One girl resting with a phone in hand secure in her path. Another studying during a 5-minute break, fighting for every advantage. The difference wasn't talent, it was access. I picked up a fresh pitcher circulating slowly through the seated crowd, topping off drinks as needed. The principal's introduction echoed from the stage, thanking sponsors and volunteers. Names were read, major donors first, of course. The carols received warm applause when mentioned. Alice inclined her head graciously. Frank lifted a hand in acknowledgement. Yara smiled politely. I kept moving, face composed. The speeches began: board members, student representatives, plans for the coming year. Words about excellence, opportunity, community. All true on the surface, but beneath the quiet mechanics of who got to claim those words. Orion clapped enthusiastically for her classmates on stage. Her enthusiasm was genuine, untainted. I envied that for a moment. The program progressed, awards handed out, photos taken. I served the last row, then stepped back. Ophelia crossed my path carrying empty trays toward the tent. Our eyes met briefly. She offered a tired but determined smile. I returned a small nod. The connection between her effort and Yara's priority crystallized fully. Influence applied gently but consistently, reshaping outcomes without fanfare. Common in elite private education, donations tied to consideration, never explicit quid pro quo, but understood all the same. Legal gray area, rarely challenged successfully, but unfair, all the same. I placed the pitcher on a service stand, hands steady despite the anger building. The final speaker wrapped up, applause rising. Guests began standing, stretching, preparing for goodbyes and photos. I watched the carols receive congratulations, handshakes, promises of future collaboration. Yara accepted compliments on her upcoming transition with practiced grace. Ophelia disappeared into the service area, book tucked under her arm. The contrast burned. I set the tray down, a cold sensation settling along my back. Everything connected now. 2 separate threads, development shortcuts and admission preferences woven from the same cloth of entitlement. I breathed slowly, letting the realization settle. The night wasn't over, but the picture was complete. I slipped away from the tables into the side hallway leading to backstage. The corridor was quieter, lined with folded chairs and stacked boxes from the setup crew. Dim bulbs overhead cast long shadows on the concrete floor. I leaned against the cool wall for a moment, pulling the phone from my apron pocket. My contact list opened to Josephine Norton, the principal, and someone I had known since our law school days when we shared late-night study sessions and too much coffee. I typed quickly, thumbs steady despite everything. Hey, it's me. I'm at the party. There's something involving Frank Carroll's real estate project and this year's scholarship process. If you're doing the closing remarks, can you give me a chance to say a few words? The school's reputation could take a hit if it's not handled carefully. I hit send and waited, staring at the screen. The reply came faster than I expected, the 3 dots appearing almost immediately. I'm backstage now. I don't know the details, but if it's serious, I can introduce you as a special guest speaker. Are you sure? I typed back without hesitation. Positive. The response was a simple thumbs up emoji followed by, stand by the wing. I'll signal when. I pocketed the phone and took a slow breath, letting the quieter space settle my thoughts. The muffled sound of applause leaked through the curtain, another award or thank you being given on stage. I paced a few steps, rehearsing nothing in particular, just feeling the weight of what might come next. Josephine and I had stayed in touch over the years, mostly holiday cards and the occasional alumni event. She had gone into education administration while I climbed the judicial ladder. We respected each other's paths, even if they diverged. This ask was big. It risked her position if things went sideways. But she trusted my judgment enough to agree quickly. I checked the time on my phone, still early enough for the closing segment. The hallway door opened briefly as a staff member passed with a box of programs, nodding politely without recognition. I moved closer to the curtain gap, peering out at the audience. Rows of chairs faced the stage, families attentive. Orion sat cross-legged on the grass up front with her friends, eyes bright as she watched the proceedings. The Carols were in the donor section, composed and expectant. I pulled back, staying out of sight. My mind ran through possibilities: what Josephine might say, how the crowd would react, what I would actually choose to reveal if given the floor. The decision wasn't made yet. It depended on her introduction and the moment itself. Another round of applause rippled through. I flexed my fingers, feeling the lingering coolness from the phone screen. Years on the bench had taught me timing, when to speak, when to let silence do the work. This felt like one of those moments. A crew member adjusted lighting nearby, the glow changing subtly. I stayed in the shadows, patient. The program was winding down. I could sense it in the shifting energy from the audience. Josephine's voice came over the system next, warm and professional, thanking volunteers and sponsors. My pulse stayed even. She listed several names, pausing for recognition. Then, a slight hesitation, barely noticeable unless you were listening for it. I stepped closer to the wing. Her tone shifted to the final announcement. The hallway felt smaller suddenly, the air thicker. I waited for the cue we had arranged. Everything balanced on the next few minutes. The curtain rustled as someone adjusted it from the other side. I smoothed the apron front absent-mindedly, then stopped. No need for nerves. This was calculated. Josephine's words continued, wrapping up appreciations. Then the invitation I had requested. My hand rested on the fabric edge. Ready. The stage lights brightened slightly. I took one quiet step forward, staying just out of view. The audience settled, expectant. Josephine's voice carried clear. And now a few words from a very special guest. I moved into position. The moment arrived. I stood there waiting for her to call the name. The crowd murmured softly. My heart beat steady. This was the turning point. Everything I had observed converged here. I kept my posture, relaxed, hands at my sides. The introduction came. I stepped forward when signaled. The reveal would be simple, direct. No drama needed beyond the truth itself. I positioned myself at the wing entrance, visible only to Josephine. She glanced my way, eyes meeting mine for confirmation. I nodded once. Her expression remained professional as she continued. The program concluded smoothly, then the shift. And before we close, I'd like to invite Judge Magnolia Mallory to share a brief message with us. The name landed. I walked onto the stage. I stepped onto the stage as the lights brightened, the microphone crackling softly when Principal Josephine Norton took her place at the podium. She thanked the parents, the teachers, the volunteers, her voice warm, practiced, carrying easily across the lawn. The audience listened attentively, some still holding drinks, others leaning forward in their chairs. Then she moved to the scholarship announcement. After a thorough and transparent review of all applications, she said, pausing just long enough for the words to settle, the board has decided to award the full scholarship to the student who demonstrated the highest merit, Ophelia. Applause started immediately, polite at first, then building as people turned to look for the recipient. Ophelia stood frozen near the service tent, eyes wide, hand half raised, as if she wasn't sure the name was really hers. A few teachers near her began clapping harder, encouraging her forward. She took hesitant steps toward the stage, face flushed with disbelief. Josephine waited until the applause died down, then smiled broadly. And tonight, we are especially honored to have with us Judge Magnolia Mallory, who generously assisted the board in ensuring complete fairness in our selection process, and who currently oversees urban planning projects in our region. The shift in the crowd was instant. Heads turned, whispers rippled outward. I walked from the wing into the full light, stopping at the center of the stage. I reached behind my back and untied the apron strings, pulling the white fabric over my head in one slow motion. I folded it once, twice, and set it on the podium with deliberate care. The lawn had gone quiet. Frank Carroll's posture stiffened in his seat. Alice's hand paused midway to her glass. Yara's phone lowered to her lap. I looked out at them, not with anger, not with triumph, just clarity. I leaned slightly toward the microphone and spoke only 2 sentences, voice steady and amplified across the entire gathering. Justice doesn't require many words. From this day forward, my family will have no further association with the Carroll family. I stepped back. Orion rose from her spot on the grass, weaving quickly through the seated guests until she reached the steps. She climbed them without hesitation and came to stand beside me, slipping her small hand into mine. We held it there together. The silence stretched thick and complete. Josephine cleared her throat softly behind me, then addressed the audience again, voice calm. "Thank you all for a wonderful evening. Safe travels home." People began to stand, movements, slow conversations starting in low tones. Ophelia reached the stage, accepting the certificate from Josephine with shaking hands. The principal gave her a genuine embrace. The Carrolls remained seated longer than most. Frank's jaw worked silently. Alice stared straight ahead. Yara's face had lost its usual composure. Guests filed past them with polite nods that felt different now, less deferential, more careful. I stayed on stage until the crowd thinned, Orion's grip firm in mine. Teachers approached Ophelia with congratulations, some tearful. A few parents came up to thank Josephine for the transparent process. No one approached the Carrolls. The string quartet packed up quietly. Lights dimmed section by section as crews began cleanup. Orion leaned her head against my arm. "Mom." I squeezed her hand. "It's okay." We descended the steps together. Ophelia spotted us and walked over, certificate clutched to her chest. "Thank you," she whispered, eyes shining. I shook my head. "You earned it." Josephine joined us, voice low. "That took courage. Both of you." We spoke briefly about next steps, official letters, press releases if needed. The lawn emptied steadily. The Carrolls finally stood. Frank guided his family toward the exit without looking back. No goodbyes offered or accepted. The night air felt clearer as the crowd dispersed. Orion and I walked to the parking area, her hand still in mine. Cleanup crews moved efficiently, folding chairs, gathering linens. The stage lights powered down one by one. We reached the car in silence. I opened the door for Orion, then paused, looking back at the now darkened lawn. Everything had changed in the space of a few minutes, not with shouting or accusations, just with truth placed exactly where it belonged. Orion buckled in and looked up at me. "Are we okay?" I closed the door and walked around to the driver's side. "Yes," I said, starting the engine. "We're more than okay." We drove away from the school, the strings of lights fading in the rearview mirror. The apron remained on the podium, forgotten by the crew in the rush. It didn't matter. The message had been delivered. A few months later, I sat in my chambers overlooking the city. The view from the high floor stretched across downtown buildings and the river beyond, sunlight glinting off glass towers on a clear afternoon. Case files stacked neatly on the desk, but my attention drifted to the skyline, tracing familiar patterns in the urban landscape. News of Frank Carroll's development project had filtered through professional channels first, an indefinite hold after regulators demanded full supplemental environmental impact studies. The initial approvals, once fast-tracked, now faced scrutiny that uncovered gaps no one had pressed for earlier. Sources mentioned additional testing for soil contamination, potential delays stretching years. His firm issued statements about cooperation and commitment to standards, but the momentum was gone. Partners shifted focus to other ventures. I received an email from the school's board one morning, formal and carefully worded. It confirmed that following a complete reevaluation of priorities, Yara's name had been removed from the scholarship consideration list. No further explanation offered. Ophelia, on the other hand, got the official award letter, full tuition covered, plus a stipend for books and supplies. The attached note from the administration expressed gratitude for her outstanding application and dedication. She started the new term with a confidence I hadn't seen that night on the lawn. Orion settled into her new school quickly. The environment felt different, less emphasis on legacy, more on individual growth. She made friends based on shared interests rather than family connections, coming home with stories about projects and teams that excited her. We never heard from the Carrolls again. No messages, no encounters at community events, no indirect inquiries. The separation was complete, quiet, final. I kept the white apron laundered and folded in the closet at home beside my judicial robe. Two simple garments, worlds apart in appearance, hanging side by side. They served as a private reminder whenever I opened the door. Power isn't always about volume or confrontation. Sometimes it's about patience, waiting for the right moment to let facts and systems do the work. I thought about that evening often, not with satisfaction or regret, but with clarity. The choices we make when we think no one important is watching reveal more than any public statement. Fairness isn't always dramatic. It can be as simple as ensuring the process is followed without favor. Ophelia earned her opportunity through effort, not influence. Orion learned early that respect comes from character, not status. Those outcomes mattered more than any confrontation. I turned back to the desk, opening the next file. The city continued building and changing below, projects rising and falling based on rules applied evenly. Some succeeded through merit. Others stalled when shortcuts were exposed. Life moved forward. I glanced at the robe one last time before leaving for court. The fabric held weight not from thread but from what it represented. Integrity over entitlement. Truth over convenience. Those principles endured long after one night on a school lawn, and they shaped futures in ways louder words never could. The real victory wasn't in winning an argument, it was in protecting what deserved protection, quietly, completely, without need for applause.